Imagine a quiet, misty morning at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. The air is fresh. The hills are green. It is a place where the royal family goes to escape the pressure of London. But on this day, peace was shattered by a child's cry. This is a story about a cruel comment, a mother's fury, and a father who decided that protecting his children was more important than centuries of royal tradition. It all started with a little boy named Prince Louis. He was just a young child playing and laughing like any other kid. But then someone said something to him that was so mean, so vicious, that it made him break down completely. According to witnesses, the words came from a granddaughter of Queen Camilla. The insults did not just target Louis himself. They went after his mother, Catherine, and then they went somewhere even darker. They made comparisons to the tragic story of his late grandmother, Princess Diana. A boy Louis's age probably could not fully understand all those references, but he absolutely understood the venom behind them. He ran to his mother, sobbing, his little body shaking. The silence of the Scottish Highlands was shattered by the sound of a child in genuine distress. But here is where the story takes a turn that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. It was not Louis's tears that froze the staff in place. It was Catherine's face. She did not scream. She did not storm over and demand answers. She did not do any of the things you would expect from a mother who just watched her child be emotionally attacked. What witnesses described was something far more unsettling. Her expression was cold, fixed, and possessed an unshakable control that made the air around her feel like it dropped 10 degrees. One person who was nearby said it was not the absence of emotion that was alarming. It was the presence of something far more intense being actively held back. And honestly, that detail tells you everything you need to know about what happened next. Because Catherine did not react in the moment, but she absolutely reacted. She just did it behind closed doors, away from everyone, in a conversation with her husband that palace insiders are now calling the defining moment of this entire situation. After the incident, Catherine and William had a private conversation inside Balmoral, and this was not a casual chat about parenting frustrations. This was a quiet, tense, emotionally charged meeting that multiple sources say has fundamentally altered the balance of power inside the monarchy. And the way Catherine approached it is honestly fascinating. She did not come at William with anger about what happened to their son, not directly. She came at him with something much more effective. She brought up his mother. She looked at her husband, and with what insiders describe as unblinking and uncompromising directness, she laid out the total failure of the monarchy to protect Princess Diana. She talked about how Diana was not just hounded by the media. She was wounded by institutional apathy and personal strife that defined her entire experience inside the royal fold. And then Catherine made the connection explicit. She told William, in essence, that she would not allow history to repeat itself with her children. Not George, not Charlotte, and certainly not Louis. She made it clear that she would shield them from the psychological warfare and mental strain that destroyed William's own adolescence, no matter what it took. And the thing is, this was not just a wife expressing concern. According to people with intimate knowledge of their relationship, this was a key that unlocked something William has spent his entire adult life trying to compartmentalize. Because for William, the disintegration of his parents' marriage, the whispered conflicts, the tension that never really went away, and ultimately the devastating loss of his mother, those are not just memories. They are the actual building blocks of who he is. They are with him every single day. And when Catherine voiced his deepest fear out loud, the situation stopped being about one cruel comment from a step-relative. It became a horrific vision of a future he had sworn to prevent. It was in his mind the subtle accumulation of the same dynastic pressures, the same casual disregard for emotional well-being that he believes led to his mother's demise. His own children being used as pawns or collateral damage in some family power struggle. And people close to William say that was the moment everything crystallized. The old royal instinct to stay silent, the never complain, never explain principle that had been the family's survival mechanism for generations, suddenly seemed not just inadequate but actively dangerous. Inaction was no longer neutral, it was complicity, and the silent promise he made to himself as a child to do things differently was now being called in. So the very next morning, Kensington Palace felt different. Staff members described it not as fearful but as steely. There was a deliberate sense of purpose in the air. Senior aides were summoned to a closed-door meeting. Movement in certain parts of the palace was restricted. Communication links were closely monitored. Some reports even suggest that certain individuals had their personal mobile devices temporarily confiscated, which if true tells you how serious this was. This was not preparation for a public statement. This was preparation for an internal war. Legal advisors, constitutional law experts, and senior protocol officials were quietly brought in. Their presence was unexpected, and the reason for it was known only to a very small circle. And when William walked into that conference room, insiders say he did not look like a distraught father. He looked like a commander. He had a full briefing packet with him, and the contents were a clear, disciplined, and absolutely brutal response to what had happened. This was not an emotional outburst. This was a clinical plan to surgically remove Queen Camilla's extended family from any and all association with the official and ceremonial life of the monarchy. Every possible avenue for public visibility was examined, assessed, and systematically eliminated. Future invitations to state banquets ruled out. Appearances on the Buckingham Palace balcony permanently off the table. Participation in traditional ceremonial practices gone. Any responsibilities involving public engagement done. Even the most minor honorary appearances and symbolic positions were being withdrawn. Palace officials started referring to this internal directive with a phrase that is honestly chilling in its corporate precision. They called it the eraser mandate. The name tells you everything about the speed, the accuracy, and the totality of what was happening. And what is striking is that many long-serving courtiers were not necessarily uncomfortable with the decision itself. What unsettled them was how William executed it. He never raised his voice. There was no flash of anger, no visible sign of displeasure, just clear instructions and non-negotiable decisions delivered with complete composure. And that cold, calculated approach actually made the whole thing feel more serious, more permanent. Hot rage burns out eventually. This was something else entirely. This was permafrost. The staff tasked with carrying out the orders understood immediately that this was not a short-term solution to soothe feelings. This was a long-term strategic realignment imposed by the person who will one day run the entire institution. But here is the part that genuinely shocked even the most experienced courtiers at Buckingham Palace. William did not ask his father's permission. He did not consult the king. He did not arrange a meeting to discuss the matter or seek approval. He just put the entire eraser mandate into immediate effect, setting the machinery of his own Kensington Palace household in motion. King Charles was not officially notified until after the decision had been made, the orders had been given, and the new reality was already established. The communication came in the form of a formal letter. The tone was described as very polite, very controlled, observing all the required honorifics and gestures of allegiance that are demanded when addressing the sovereign. But the content was indisputable. This was not a proposal. It was not a request for guidance. It was a declaration of fact and a notification of a decision that had already been made in its entirety. One person familiar with the situation said there was no scope for conversation. The door to negotiation or reversal had been slammed shut and bolted before the king even knew the matter was on the table. And you have to imagine what that letter must have felt like for Charles. He was suddenly caught in an impossible position between his wife, whose family had just been publicly and permanently demoted, and his heir, who was exerting authority in a way that had literally never been seen before in the modern monarchy. Queen Camilla, when she found out about the decree, was reportedly furious. She argued that the decision was a direct challenge to the established royal system and to the king's personal authority. She wanted Charles to intervene immediately to veto his son to reassert the traditional hierarchy. And according to palace whispers, there were some very quick and very passionate conversations happening during this period. But Charles did not do it. He did not intervene. He did not question the command. He did not interfere at all. And people close to the king say his decision was a complicated mix of factors. He is a man weighed down by his own recent health struggles and a deep fatigue from the constant pressures the family has faced over the last few years. Harry's exit, the ongoing Andrew situation, the relentless public scrutiny. But on a more fundamental level, many believe Charles made a coldly realistic calculation. He recognized something that had been quietly revealing itself to the institution for a while now. The emotional and practical center of gravity in the monarchy is no longer entirely with him. There has been a steady, unmistakable shift toward William and Catherine. They are enormously popular with the public. They represent stability. They are the parents of the future king. They are where the public places its hopes for the monarchy's future. Starting an open power struggle with his son over this particular issue would be a fight Charles was extremely unlikely to win, either within the institution or in the court of public opinion. His inaction was in its own way an unspoken acceptance of this new reality, a quiet green light to the silent coup his son had just executed. The power dynamic has not just shifted, it has been dramatically and permanently redrawn. Now, to understand why this matters so much, you have to understand the tension that had been building for months before the Balmoral incident. The integration of Camilla Parker Bowles into the royal family was one of the most difficult and protracted public relations campaigns in modern royal history. The journey from being called the third person in a fairy tale marriage to being offered the title of queen consort took decades of careful management and slow public exposure. And a key part of that strategy was integrating her own family, her children Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes and their children, into the wider royal fabric. The idea was to normalize her presence by making her family visible. At first, the appearances were rare and carefully managed, but over time they became more regular. Family events, the Buckingham Palace balcony for major national occasions, official photographs, all of it presented the image of a modern blended royal family. and to the general public it probably looked like warmth and unity. But behind the scenes, certain long-serving officials in traditional quarters were getting increasingly concerned because in the world of monarchy, visibility is directly linked to status. And with the queen consort, the line between being part of her personal family and having quasi-official standing within the institution was getting harder and harder to distinguish. What started as a courtesy was beginning to look like an expectation. And that created a subtle but persistent tension around a fundamental question: who actually belongs at the core of this institution? The monarchy is at its essence a blood dynasty. A consort can be crowned, but her family has no constitutional position and no claim to succession. The Balmoral incident did not create this tension, it detonated it. It was the match that lit a powder keg of concerns about influence, access, and the long-term direction of the crown. So when William issued the eraser mandate, it was not just a punishment for one cruel comment. It was the decisive and brutal conclusion to a conflict that had been simmering for years. And within the palace, the understanding was immediate. The Parker Bowles era was over. The experiment with a fully blended crown had failed. In the aftermath, two distinct and increasingly separate courts emerged inside the palace system: the court of the King and Queen at Buckingham Palace, and the court of the Prince and Princess of Wales at Kensington and Windsor. And staff, who are always exquisitely attuned to the subtle currents of power, began to adjust accordingly. Allegiances shifted almost imperceptibly but unmistakably. It was now clear that the Wales would be running the show going forward. Their vision for the monarchy was a slimmed-down, concentrated operation focused entirely on the direct line of succession. Charles had championed a big, inclusive family concept, but the winds had changed. The future was leaner, more guarded, fiercely protective, and centered squarely on the Windsor core. And what is interesting is that for people who have been watching William closely over the years, this decisive and uncompromising stance was not actually a surprise. He and Catherine have done an incredible job of projecting a modern, relatable image of royalty. The devotion to family values, the mental health advocacy, the hands-on parenting. They built an enormous foundation of public trust by appearing more compassionate, more emotionally intelligent, and more in tune with ordinary life than any generation before them. But people inside the palace have long understood that there is another side to William beneath that carefully constructed public image. They describe a man who in private is firm, fiercely protective, and possesses an unshakable core of seriousness about his responsibilities and above all his family. He does not quickly forget or forgive actions he considers hurtful or disrespectful, especially when they are directed at his wife or children. In moments of crisis, the public persona of thoughtful reflection gives way to an internal reality of quiet intensity and the willingness to make hard, even unpopular decisions. What happened at Balmoral was the moment these two versions of William merged into one: the relatable father and the future king operating as the same person. And it was a preview of the kind of monarchy intends to be. His reign will not be a simple continuation of his father's or his grandmother's. It will operate on a new set of non-negotiable principles, the most important of which is the absolute and complete protection of his family's emotional and physical well-being. When news of the consequences began reaching the public, the reaction was swift and overwhelming. Support for William and Catherine surged on social media. Old photographs of Princess Diana fiercely shielding her young sons from paparazzi resurfaced and went viral, drawing a direct emotional line from the past to the present. The narrative was not about royal intrigue anymore. It was about a son who refused to let his own children suffer the way he did. It was intimate, emotionally resonant, a story about parental love and breaking cycles of trauma. And that wave of public support gave William an enormous mandate. His order was never altered, never walked back, never even seriously questioned. It remains in place, unmoved and unchanged. The message has been sent through the institution and out into the world with perfect clarity. In the future reign of King William, the emotional health of the royal children will take precedence over everything else, over family relationships, over internal politics, over centuries of royal tradition and hierarchy. And he communicated all of that without a single public speech or official announcement, just calm, effective, and utterly decisive action. The next chapter of the monarchy has begun, and it is being guided not just by duty and tradition, but by the steely and unyielding determination of a father who will not fail to protect his kids.